Hey, Ray.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm pumped to chat with you about all things related to win-loss and maybe a couple of other interesting topics. Just to set context for the discussion, there's just so much going on right now in the B2B tech space at the board level where we're hearing from a lot of clients and prospective clients about how CEOs, leadership teams are being asked for more during those board meetings about why they're winning and losing, and in particular focused on churn and why organizations are not renewing, with NRR being such an important metric. So I wanted to just start off this series to talk to you about your experience with win-loss, your experience with boards. I know we've worked together for a number of years as you've gone from company to company. But as the CEO, recently a CEO, would love to hear more about your thoughts on win-loss. And I don't know, let's just jump right in.
Across 4 companies, you and I have worked really well together. And I think, before we started, as either a go-to-market leader and or the CEO, I think the general assumption was, well, if we win, I'm going to ask the AE and the SE kind of why we won. And I'll get the answer. Then if we lost, I'll ask them the same thing. But the more, if you take a step back and you think about it, that's probably the last cohort of people you want to ask why, because they'll be, oftentimes the reason why we won is because the AE was the best AE in the history of selling, and the reason why we lost was that the customer was stupid.
Right.
But when you take emotion and personal interest aside, and you really have professionals like you and your team come in and ask just the right set of questions to the right people, you'll be surprised. And as you know, I was shocked at the level of depth in the feedback that I got and the feedback that I did get. And I applied it across every function of my business. And as you mentioned, boards, the board, I think, at least in my last board, the chairman, he hadn't heard of this program. And I said, you got to read some of these things. They're unbelievable. So I went. So he was probably a skeptic to start, and then the board fully expected me twice a year to have you and your team come on and be like, okay, if we look at our SMB segment, or if we look at this product line, or if we look at this vertical market, here are some trends, and this is what we're hearing, and we would take that away, and there could be a pricing and packaging component. So finance would take action, or product would take action, sales and marketing, of course, would take action. So it was always a really big part of my running my business and really understanding truly what the wants and needs were of the customer and what was happening in a pretty dynamic marketplace.
And then in those board meetings, just to kind of take me there, did you also have your functional leadership team there as well with you, like head of sales, head of product marketing during those discussions?
I did. We would typically go deep in a particular function in a given board meeting. So we decided. Now this was during the pandemic, right? So we didn't have a full day board session. Every other month we'd go pretty deep in a session. So we'd get into really product specific detail. It takes too long to deploy, or the architecture isn't modern enough, or whatever the case may be. And then we'd have the product team in there to hear that and take feedback. And take action, into the roadmap, as an example, or, sales was too pushy or whatever the case may be. And we take that and understand how to maybe do a little bit, better solution selling. But they were actually the functional leaders were in listening. They didn't do the presenting. Your team did the presenting, which I felt was important. Because again, there was no tipping of the scale, if you will, based on that functional leaders, MBOs or whatnot. So, but they were there, and it was a healthy dialogue between those functional leaders and the board.
And it's interesting because I think one of the challenges people bring up with research programs, win-loss programs, or other is, how do we take action with the information that's being delivered? And it sounds like you had a good rhythm to be able to take some of that insight, get those functional leaders together and drive action. So did you, on a biannual basis or quarterly basis, did you work to unpack some of those actions from the program? Did you rely upon, your research director on our side to make recommendations? How did that action piece work for you?
Well, we wouldn't, you don't want to overreact on one or two of your team's reports, right? But you can see consistent themes and trends coming out. So, as an example, Depth and integration to my ERP system, would be a pro or a con. For areas where we realize that, we seem to work really well within this segment of a distribution set of customers who are running a specific ERP system, that would really inform a go-to-market campaign. Say, let's double down and let's focus on customers that have this architecture. Conversely, if there was concern on another application that either we didn't really integrate well with, or we didn't sell that we did integrate well, we'd make changes. We had that a little bit on my last business at our ability to integrate with SAP. We had dozens and dozens of SAP customers, but for some reason there was a theme in the market, and I'm sure it was planted by our competitors, that we couldn't do it. So what do? We built out a demo specific to SAP. We'd show their data within the SAP instance. We'd reference customers. We'd have an integration pre-built between SAP, and then that kind of blocker went away in the go-to-market. So yeah, we'd look for consistent themes, and then we'd look at our roadmap and we'd make decisions, either A, how we change the enablement from a go-to-market perspective, or B, what we would do within our own product roadmap.
And then did you ever track the results of those actions taken in some sort of way? So if you made that decision, do you go back to look at the results 3 or 6 months down the road?
Absolutely. So we would always look at, sales conversion, and we would look at conversion by stage and by segment. So whereas it wasn't necessarily, as simple as, SAP demo equals 30% increased close rate, but when you combine all these things and you start to see a better close rate within that segment of the customer base, you could, you could kind of, you didn't have to squint too hard to say, hey, it was the actions that we took based on the feedback from the win-loss that's allowing us to better compete and win in the market.
Awesome. And then win-loss being one data source, what other data sources did you typically, or have you typically relied upon when building kind of a fully formed perspective on a topic? So you got some reports that maybe point you in a certain direction, but you got sales feedback you mentioned earlier, which is kind of questionable as far as the reliability. But are there other sources that you recommend to people to tap into?
Sure. I mean, I think you've got to really go talk to your customer, not just at the point of sale, and not just at the point right after they implement, but 6 months, a year, 2 years later, because their satisfaction with the product is going to ebb and flow throughout that time frame, right? So spending a lot of time, be it an NPS or having the customer success team really understand, is this doing what you wanted it to do? So a ton of customer interaction, that was pretty important. I think looking at competitive information, getting as much insight as we could, leverage whether it's G2 Crowd or other opportunities to get insight into what the competitors are doing, what they're doing in my marketplace. Are they winning? Are they losing? Where are they winning? Try to understand that. And then talking to ecosystem partners, whether it was, hey, this is a big Salesforce customer, so let's talk to them about what the wants and needs are of the client, or it's a big SAP customer, or Deloitte's their integrator, Accenture's their integrator. So working with folks like that, all those things can really give you, I think, really great insight into what's truly happening in the market and how people are perceiving, your company and your product.
And then there's probably no easy way to centralize all of that information. It's having conversations, it's collecting information, it's kind of your internal IQ on the space in your network. So that's really interesting. And just out of curiosity, I know with win-loss, a lot of the work that you've seen is interview-based, but do you think surveys are also an important component of the story, or do you think that they just, they don't give you quite enough intel?
I think it depends. It depends on who's delivering the survey, who's filling out the survey, and the level of depth in the survey. So I do think they have a role. So whether it's an NPS score or something like that, I think if executed the right way, can be pretty helpful. But we invested a lot of time and money, not just in your solution, but other things that could make us better. So we had a pretty robust, enablement stack with tools like Seismic and Gong to really understand, okay, what content is converting at the right rate and what isn't, and then what can we do to either double down on that piece of content and or quickly create a piece of content to move a customer through a funnel, we would spend time as leadership, sales leadership, listening to gong calls, looking at videos, understanding kind of where, if something went well, what was it that the AE kind of said that got the customer to react the way in which we wanted them to react. And then conversely, if, we go through a call and it's a great call and the AE didn't close for a next step, we'd say, well, gee, I think we have an opportunity to maybe improve on that. And so I think, when you look at all of those things, so there can be a data-driven component that can give you, some outside of your tool set that can give you insight into what's working and what isn't.
It's interesting. A lot of those tools are kind of leaning heavily into this whole Gen AI trend that we're seeing out there. Tell me what your thoughts are about that type of technology and how it might help to kind of support win-loss research and kind of other maybe centralization of the data that you were talking about earlier to tell more of a summarized story of what might be going on in a market or within your sales cycles. So let's hear your thoughts on that space.
Sure. And I think the bald head and the gray beard will indicate that I've been doing this for a little bit. So I've been lucky enough to be in technology since the early 90s and saw the birth of the internet. And I spent a lot of time in e-commerce and mobile. And I've debated this with executives and investors in the last 3 months. I'm not sure I've seen anything like this ever. And I'll include the internet in that. That might be provocative. I don't know. But I think what this is going to do to all functions of society, government, technology, customers, whatever the case may be, students, you pick it, it's going to be like something that we've never seen. It's going to be truly revolutionary, I believe. Now, when you take that and apply it to customer acquisition, customer retention, you don't have to spend a lot of time with these tools to understand that we'll take GPT or now Auto GPT to really just create agents that are constantly monitoring, looking, asking, sending, gathering feedback, emailing, sending video, whatever the case may be. And these are programmatic things that you can do in machine time now that would typically have taken, dozens of people to kind of execute a cross-functional marketing campaign. Now, I think with tools like this, you should be able to get 10x, 5x, something like that of the velocity through your bullpick sales and marketing function that you could never have envisioned years ago. So the ability to not only write copy, create video, create assets, learn, engage based on prompts, do other things, and to be able to automate that now with Auto GPT, I think is pretty transformational. And if you look at feedback from customers as it relates to, we need a better integration between system A and system B. Well, now you can simply say, okay, write me an integration between system A and system B. And it will not only write you that integration, but it will say, hey, by the way, system A had a bug and I fixed that, and system B had a bug and I fixed that. So to me, I think if you're not asking yourself as a leader, how can I get 10x the productivity and volume through each of my functions in my business by leveraging tools like this, someone's going to beat you because they're going to be doing it.
It seems like it's leveling the playing field for a lot of organizations who have built these really impressive applications, tools, whatever you want to call them, and now you can just use a prompt to kind of do the same thing that they've spent millions and millions of dollars building over many years. Who do you think are going to be the winners and losers at the end of the day as it relates to this technology and the velocity at which it's being adopted? Like, who's going to survive? Who's going to thrive? And who's going to die? Not specific companies, but like what
Sure.
company type do you think will?
So I think one, like if you go from kind of the base stack up, right? So if you look at the substrate, so I think those with the deepest pockets and the smartest people will win. And that's going to be just an arms race to the bottom from a cost perspective. So I'd go, as an entrepreneur, I would go nowhere near Google or Microsoft or Apple because they're going to come up with their own models and they're going to outspend you. I think then from there, you can say, okay, who has an interesting corpus of content, data, information that can train these models? I think that's a very interesting space to look at today. So proprietary around, crop formations, weather patterns, things of that nature. Someone who has a really unique data set that can feed that can feed a model and to create a, differentiated output. I think that's interesting. And then I think the application layer on top of that, creating these, sales and marketing stacks or whatever the case may be. So I think there's going to be winners and losers all in that space. But I've seen, there are folks who are taking their proprietary content and they're not sharing it, and then there are folks that are. I think history would say that, if you just are a totally closed environment and you're not open to, ingesting other sets of information to get an outcome, you may not win. I wouldn't bet against Google. I think they've got both, right? They've got if you look at just the amount of information and content they have across the YouTube property, across Google, et cetera, I think they've got a pretty, so they could win across both fronts. But then I think, other, whether it's a Craigslist or businesses like that, I think having that unique set of information and applying it, I think will create winners. And I think there'll be some technology companies that are out there today that are a nice app to do A, B, C, or D that are just going to get blown away by what these tools can do, and what people can easily do who maybe don't have the ability to code, what they can do with these tools that they've never been able to do before.
Yeah, it's amazing, all the different use cases within the research space, in particular within win-loss, and we're experimenting with anything from taking a transcript to turning it into a set of key findings, to taking those key findings, turning those into a set of tags, doing analysis. There's just so much to do within the win-loss world. The other piece that you mentioned, which is that database, having that proprietary database. Question is, how does that look when what you know about the win-loss space and churn research and all of that? All of the information that we're collecting as an organization is confidential to the client that we're supporting. But it seems like there's this opportunity to build a huge database of competitive intelligence through interviews or insights in other aspects of the buyer's journey. And I know that there's companies out there that do that today, right? I'm sure you get hit up all the time for expert interviews, people looking to use your perspective on technology or process to sell that. So what do you when you think about win-loss and what you know about win-loss firms like ours, like where do you think we should go with the technology as far as the database is concerned?
Yeah, so I think obviously the proprietary nature and whatever is specific to the customer, I mean that's contractually between you and the customer.
Right.
But if you can extract and take a step back and just understand broader data sets and what those data sets are telling you, you don't have to. I don't think you have to squint too hard to say, okay, so if we hear that it's an auto GPT, right? So now as an example, so we hear that integrations to systems are a blocker for us. So there's no reason why you can create an auto GPT just to run and say, okay, help the sales team learn, get the product out there, get it won, get the contract executed. Is the contract executed? These are the terms you can execute against. Deploy the product, gap in product, build integration, integrate to system, test system, deploy. And these are things that, again, that can be done in relative machine time by agents who can string these prompts together. So you could look at the entire cycle from identification of TAM through, new enhancement and product launch, and all these things could be strung together. The more time you spend thinking about it and reading about it, it's not hard for you to envision how something like that, could come to market, right? And I think that information, of that win-loss information, is such a treasure trove on both that it will inform the upstream identification of TAM, identification of prospect, and then all the way downstream to truly now product development.
Yeah, it's amazing how accurate some of the work that we've done testing it out. The results, how accurate they are. It's scary to a certain degree. I know that there's been a big question mark about putting confidential information into GPT, and I know that a lot of people just have access to the public domain to be able to do that. What are the private domains? I mean, I know you can spend $1 million to get a private instance of it, but where do you see that piece going with this technology as data privacy is a big issue that people are raising as a flag?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I think we need some governmental and probably integrated global entity to really put guardrails and controls around this, whether that's a new EPA or FDA. Like, we need something like that that has some level of international integration, because the genies, you can't put it back in the bottle. Like these they're out there to suggest that we're gonna stop. We can't do that. We just have to hustle and put some guardrails around it. Now, as it relates to the private information of the data and the content, again, I go back to my private data set. So if you're a drug manufacturer, you've got dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of years of proprietary trial information that you can use to predict good and predict bad and maybe create new drugs. And I think, it's going to be incumbent upon that business to, I can inform the model, but I need to put some guardrails around the model to make sure that model A in trying to learn and get better doesn't reach out to model B and have a conversation with model B to come up with some thing that we didn't even envision, right? So if you read about where some of these things are, I mean, some of the smartest people in the world around AI, it's some of the output is surprising them. The speed in which it's learning is surprising them, which means we don't really know what this thing could be. So I think, yes, you have to play with it and you have to apply it, but you've got to really put some guardrails around it to ensure that there aren't negative, unintended consequences to what you're trying to do with it.
I'd love to continue this conversation in 6 to 12 months just to see where we are at that point.
Could be 6 to 12 weeks based on what's happened. It might not even be 6 to 12 months, right?
We probably just need a few weeks based on the pace of change, for sure. I guess last question for you is just about advice that you would give to other CEOs, board members, as it relates to leveraging win-loss type intelligence to inform really big decisions that they might be making, and how to lean into it a little bit more. So assuming these people have very limited experience with independent win-loss information, they're relying heavily upon CRM data and salespeople for insights today. Like, what is the big, piece of advice that you would give to them?
Yeah, I'd say digest it without without color from a functional leader. So inevitably we could see, let's see what, that client was an idiot, or they were cheap, or they didn't have this, or we were never going to win that because Deloitte never, whatever the case may be. Like, no, we have professionals going to ask questions. We're going to take that information back. We're going to take the personalities and emotion outside of it, and we're going to look at consistent themes, and then we're not going to overreact, meaning, what may be a trend in your SMB segment may not be a trend in your enterprise segment. So it's not going to be a one size fits all. What may be a trend in consumer goods, may not work in discrete manufacturing, or whatever the case may be. So you really want to just kind of break it down into logical chunks, whether it's functional, size of market, vertical market, customers with global footprints, without global footprints, to really learn where these themes are, and don't be defensive around it, and have it just be a pretty big part of an overall data set to inform your go-to-market strategy, your product strategy, and ultimately your company strategy.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, perception is reality for sure. And I think that we see that all the time. People are pushing back on what the buyer said, or what the customer said. But at the end of the day, I think it's their perception that really matters. So,
right.
Ray, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy. So we'll get this one set up and out there for the world to see, and we'll reconnect in 2 weeks to 6 months to talk more about the emergence of Gen AI. So thanks so much, Ray.
I love it. I'm in, and anything I can do to help, I've really appreciated everything you and your business done for me, Ryan. So best of luck, Ray. And look forward to the next chat.